So this week we're going to jump into the humanistic perspectives, and we're kind of moving through time as we're doing so. So, Freud is one of the first major psychologists out there. Really, when we're looking at personality, he's one of the big ones. And now we're shifting into the humanistic perspective. So we're jumping into, the 1950s, 60s, 70s. Freud being around the late 1800s, early 1900s, and a lot of his contemporaries, the Neo-Freudians, in those 20s, 30s, 40s, etc. So the humanists are shifting perspectives completely, and there is definitely a cultural shift going on where they're working here in the United States in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. If you think about what's happening in the world around then, you have Vietnam, you have flower power, you have all these big shifts in culture and perspective, which is very much influencing the humanistic perspective as well. And as you can see in the name itself, we're really shifting to away from more negative views of the primal instincts, those types of things, to much more positive perspective. The idea being that humans are inherently good, and it's the environment or relationships in particular that can cause maladaptive or negative behaviors, negative personalities, things like depression, anxiety, antisocial type behavior, crime, things like that. So it's the relationships now in the environment, this shift away from kind of an internal movement of personality to more of an external view with the humanists, and still recognizing there's an internal component, but saying that the internal component is much more positive rather than negative. Now, there's two big theorists here. First one's Abraham Maslow, and Maslow created what he called his hierarchy of needs, and said that depending on where an individual's needs are being met, is going to affect their personality. It's going to affect how they think, they feel, they act. So if my basic needs are met, so I have, food, shelter, and water here under physiological, I feel safe both emotionally and physically, then I start to, focus my meeting the needs of connecting with other people, socially, intimately, etc. Then I can start to work on myself. But unless these lower levels are met and it starts at the very bottom, we can't move up to the next level. And that's according to Maslow. So your personality is going to be impacted on these things, and that can shift. Your social life, you may be here, esteem, self-actualization levels, but maybe at work, it's an unsafe environment. Your boss is sexually harassing you, or it's physically unsafe because they're not really following OSHA guidelines. So you're focused on this in the workplace. You can't connect with your peers. So it does affect different aspects of your life, but the environment then is impacting again how you apply to this theory. The other big theorist from a humanistic perspective is Carl Rogers. And I put a picture of a tree here because Carl Rogers had believed that we have three primary things, much like a tree does. A tree requires, sunlight, air, and water to grow and to flourish. Obviously, it requires a few more things, but those are kind of three big things. And Carl Rogers said that humans to flourish and develop require three things as well. So you can imagine like the sun shining here is a lot like the unconditional positive regard or unconditional love that we require in our especially early childhood relationships, but even as we grow, we need someone we can connect with who loves us unconditionally. So it's not like the parent who says, that they're happy with their child because they're doing well, or that's what the child perceives or feels, but it's the child who feels and perceives that the parent loves them no matter what. The rain falling down could be much like tears. It's like empathy. It's feeling emotions for the child here. So we need connections with people who demonstrate empathy towards us. If not, that's going to impact, again, how we develop and how we grow. And then finally, you can think of the air as kind of genuineness. We need people who are genuine with us and show us who they truly are. If any of those three things are lacking in those relationships, it's going to impact our growth and development. Just like this tree, if it's not getting enough sunlight, if it's not getting enough rain, if it's not getting enough air, it's not going to grow and develop properly. Same thing with humans and personality. And what Rogers, would say is that it can impact particular congruence, and congruence being how we view ourselves versus who we think we should be, our actual self, who we are, versus who we ought to be, our ought self. And the greater the discrepancy there, the more likely you are to have some issues, maybe with depression, anxiety, etc. So again, the humanists are focused on using the perspectives that are changing culturally to focus more on positive things, the environment and relationships. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask.